Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she is. Today, we have a special guest, somebody I know really well. His name is Kyle Hutton. So, Kyle, I wanted you to come on the show today because Mom as Well is all about mamas and daddies, but it's about parenting those children who have been fostered or adopted, and then that qualifies you. And so would you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, I know the story quite well, but I'd like to share that with my guest.
Yeah, I mean, I was adopted when I was 6 weeks old through DePelchin Children's Center here in the Houston, Texas area, and I've known all my life that I'm adopted. You know, my parents have talked about that and told me about that from as long as I can remember, so there was never this daytime soap opera moment where my parents were like, oh, by the way, you're adopted, like that wasn't how it went down. I mean, I can remember talking about it when I was very young, and so I mean, that's how I started my life, and as you and I have gotten to experience and go ahead first into the foster care world, and even some of the overseas stuff we've done, really probably for more than anything for me to get to connect with and make sense of the fact that a lot of kids start their life that way, the same way my life started. You and I got to dive headfirst into that conversation, and it's been a crazy ride, and I'm so proud of this part of the conversation, Mama's Well, because I think you, number one, you have an insatiable quest for knowledge about things that are important to you.
This is true.
And and an insatiable desire to talk about them, and I'm glad you have an outlet outside.
Your ears getting tired?
I'm just kidding. No, this thing, like the podcast and video podcast and website, is just, I think it's just really cool because it's a place where you can share with other people the things that you have been learning for yourself and for our family.
Yeah.
And I just think that's really cool.
And am learning, continuing to learn.
Yeah.
So Kyle, I want to kind of go back to when you were a boy. When you first, do you remember the first, I know you said that
I'm still a boy.
You're still a boy. You're a boy man. Do you remember the first time? I know you said your parents always told you were adopted, but do you remember the first conscious memory that you remember thinking like I'm adopted? Like, what does that mean? Did you know I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions, but did you know anyone else in your class or at your church or just in your world that was adopted? Or were you kind of like the Lone Ranger? Did you feel like you were the Lone Ranger? Obviously you weren't. But this was, I hate to give away your age, but this was in, I won't say, but it was many moons. many moons ago.
Many moons.
Tell us about what that was like when your first conscious memory of I'm adopted, and what does that mean? Who am I?
Yeah. I mean, I knew other people that were adopted, some of my best friends.
Okay.
My best friends and some of their siblings were adopted. So,
did y'all talk about that? Or did y'all just go did y'all just wink at each other when y'all were passing in the hall and say?
Yeah, not a whole lot. I don't remember a lot of conversation about being adopted because I think for the first part of my life, I think I really probably both consciously and unconsciously tried to make that not a defining thing, like not a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've got these great parents, like, and just leave it there. Just kind of leave it at that. And so I don't remember. So to answer that question, I don't remember like having conversations and, that kind of stuff.
You just kind of wanted to like not talk about it so much.
Yeah. And I don't know that was as much a conscious. I don't think that was like I wasn't thinking to myself, oh my gosh, whatever you do, don't talk about adoption.
Okay.
Like I don't remember having that. I can imagine, I can probably connect with a part of me that didn't want to talk about it because of whatever stigma would be associated with feeling like somebody's interpretation of that might be, oh, well, somebody didn't want you. You know what I mean? So I think...
so somebody didn't want you. That was a thought in your head.
Yeah.
Aww,
for sure.
I want you.
That's a different show.
So you didn't really want, but in your room behind closed doors, you weren't talking about with your friends so much. And you said your parents always talked to you about it, but did you talk with them much? And then was there ever like a curiosity of like, I wonder about my birth parents? Because in 1969, when you were adopted, I know that...
there it happened. You just gave it away.
Don't tell anybody. But closed adoption. Like what that meant was that like records are sealed and like, Raiders of the Lost Ark, nobody gets to them.
Yeah. Yep. The Ark was hidden for sure. Couple things I'll throw in that are memories from being a kid, and one of them's sad and one of them's kind of funny. But I can remember now. First off, you've known me for a long time, right? And I mean, I'm fairly dramatic. I like stories. I love songs. I love to embellish. Like I love everything to be really as big and awesome as it can be, right?
Yeah.
And so I can so that side of me that can lean towards that a little bit. A lot of times around my birthdays or when I was in trouble for something. Like I can remember being in Cedar Hill, Texas, which would mean it was sometime after 10 years old. I can remember being grounded and sitting up in my room and looking out at the window that overlooked the driveway. And I can remember looking out and thinking, is anybody going to come get me? Like, get me out of this trouble. Come get me. Come take me away from the trouble that I'm in. And, it's funny, during the great times where my parents were taking me to do great stuff, I never wondered if anybody was going to come get me because I was having a great time.
Sure.
And then I can remember one time, I'm gonna out my brother Mark on this one. So if you are watching the podcast, you earned this one. I remember one day at dinner, Mark and I were in some kind of a fight, and he's 2 years younger than me. And so we definitely had the sibling rivalry thing going. And man, I have no idea what I said to Mark, but his response was, at least I'm not adopted.
Uh-oh.
Ooh, and my dad got so hot. And so I think for effect, just because I wanted to see how much trouble Mark was going to get in, I like slammed my, chair back and slammed the, napkin down on the table and stormed off and went out the front door. And the further I got, the louder I heard my dad getting with Mark, and I thought, I got him.
That just goes to show you how sibling rivalry is really all about the child's relationship with the parent, right?
Yeah. So anyway,
We'll talk about that.
Going back to the drama thing. I mean, I remember thinking, I'm going to milk this one. I'm going to overplay this one a little bit. So,
Yeah.
so I think I know now, and I know we'll talk about, some of the things that have been a part of my journey as I've come to understand myself more and where I come from and how that shapes me. I definitely know that it was affecting me. I think as a child, it was affecting me at a much greater unconscious level.
Sure.
And as I learned more about who I am and that kind of stuff, and I'm, I don't know, as I made decisions to find out more about where I come from and who I am, a lot of that really started to make sense.
So how do you think that did affect you? Like, you talk about it on a subconscious level, and obviously when it's going on from a place of our subconscious, we're not awake, we're not aware of that. But looking back, how do you feel like that the adoption, not knowing anything about your birth parents, not really ever thinking you would even have an option. I mean, there wasn't social media back then. I mean, you couldn't go, it wasn't ancestry.com. There wasn't even a computer.
Ouch.
Or a cell phone. That wasn't until we were in college. So, just thinking about that, how do you now let's look at it from hindsight. How do you think that played into your self-esteem or your level of security as a young man? How did that play into your life?
Yeah, I think regardless of how well my parents handled it and how well intentioned they were,
with very in that time period,
it.
very little knowledge.
Yeah.
We did not talk about trauma back then.
Sure.
We did not talk about any of those things that we talk about now. So they didn't have. They were not as equipped as we could potentially be in 2000,
absolutely,
in 2020.
Absolutely, and as healthy. And nobody's perfect, right? I mean, we're doing the best we can, and we're trauma informed. Yeah.
Our son is over there running sound, so no comment from
no
the
comment
crew.
from the peanut gallery. So I think for me, my situation and the way my parents handled it was probably as healthy as people knew how to handle it back then.
I mean, I do have the books that your parents gave you.
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
did.
I Am Adopted.
There's 3 little books,
Yeah.
and I remember a golden book of and I think it was You Are Special was the name of it, and it's about and we have some of those tools that we use. With our girls now, and I think that's important.
So let's get a little deeper. You're talking about all this stuff. I want to know how that affected you.
Okay, I'm getting there.
Okay.
Slow down. Don't badger the guest.
Listen, parents of kids who are in foster care or adoption, they don't have a long time. They're very busy. So I need you to cut to the chase.
Wow. Okay. Here's what I know. I know that there were wheels turning in the back of my mind until I actually found out my story and found out where I came from. I lived with not knowing who I was. Just at a foundational level, not knowing who I was. And, I think when you don't want to address something or look at something or turn over that rock or open that door, it's real easy to discount the value of what you would find behind that door.
Right.
So, for me, it was always, man, I've got great parents. I've got all these great opportunities. There's so many people out there that, whether it's living in poverty or not having opportunities or being around things that are, extremely unhealthy, like, drugs or, like whatever, all of the things that some kids have to grow up in, I wasn't, right? So there's
justification.
It's justification, and it's trying to reconcile, how do I have a sense of gratefulness while possibly still allowing myself to wonder past what I've been given.
And isn't that kind of how I know you really well, and I can see that was one of your coping strategies as a kid and as an adult, that when you begin to feel something deeply, or pain, or things like that, you quickly jump to, you're a 7 on the Enneagram, and that's an optimist. So you quickly jump to, but I have so much. And sometimes that is a beautiful quality, and I really, really need that in my life. But sometimes I think that can leave you, and has left you, not truly feeling the depth of the loss that you experienced as a child.
Yeah, I think the fact, like, it was when I did find out where I came from, and I got to know the story.
Which was when you were in
Not until
30s.
I was like 34.
Yeah. So I got to do that with you, which
You
is
did.
a great story. This is probably going to be 2 episodes. I'm just saying, because we haven't even touched on some of the things that I want to get to.
There's a lot to tell.
So keep going. So
like, I know that what you're saying is true because of the level of, like, peace, and it was almost like there had been something. I've described it before as like there's this little hamster running around back there all the time, and it's simply, who am I? Like, what am I here for? Where did I come from? What? And so even when you're not thinking about it, that subconscious is still rolling back there. And when I finally found out, that hamster stopped running. Just stopped.
Oh, this is a perfect lead-in, because one of the things that I've learned through the things that I've studied for how to, you probably are, if you've been listening at all to any of these podcasts, you know that Kyle and I adopted 2 little girls that we were fostering. Now they are our daughters. And so I really I just dove in to learning about trauma and how this affects our kids, and that have been adopted or that have been in foster care. And one of the things that is so, that I have found, and other experts that I trust and read have said that's so important, is that our kids need to be given their story. And I think that's what you're saying, is even though you were told you were adopted, there really wasn't much of a story. But in absence of a story, like, especially children, they're very egocentric, like, developmentally, and they make up a story.
Sure.
And it's usually they are to blame because something went wrong, and they don't understand what it was, and so it must be something inherently wrong with them.
Yeah.
Did you experience that?
Oh, yeah. And again, part of what I think at the time, even though it was a closed adoption, part of what I think my parents did that was really healthy was in their file cabinet where they kept all their personal records. They had a file on my adoption, and in that file, because it was closed, there wasn't a whole lot in there. but there were 2 or 3 pages that went through and gave some very basic information on, the biological mother, the biological father, biological siblings, paternal grandmother, paternal grandfather, and it was maybe 2 or 3 pages typed.
Real typewriter.
Real type.
Does anybody know that real typewriter, like paper?
Exactly. And so, and that was my file.
Yeah, that was your life book.
Yeah, I could go look at it anytime I wanted to, and my parents were always very supportive. And later in life, both as a child still under their roof, and then college, and even on into into adulthood, being very willing to say, "Hey, let's go talk to the attorneys that facilitated your adoption, and if you want to find anything, you know what I mean, that kind of deal." So,
I just love that your parents did that.
yeah, it was great. I mean,
because I think back then there was so much shame, not maybe just completely connected with adoption, but just, it was like, I know you're not this old, but we watched it, but like Beaver, Leave It to Beaver, the Cleaver family,
Sure.
everything is perfect and
Yeah.
polished, and you've vacuumed before your husband comes home, and your apron is clean, and all of that.
No,
but
I get it.
that's awesome that
Yeah.
your parents were. You know what that shows? It shows that they were confident in who they were in your life.
Yeah.
They were confident of their role in your life
Sure.
as your adoptive parents.
Yeah.
And that has really doesn't take anything away that you had biological parents.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure probably if you got my mom in here,
That's a great idea. Kathy, you want to come?
Yeah, you talk to her. I mean, I'm sure, just like with our girls, in having, we have contact with
Yes.
biological family. I think there's probably always little sense of, at least a little sense of fear. You know what I'm saying? Of like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like how
Insecurity.
Yeah. But anyway, so I had my file that I could go look at, and that was kind of the one little connection to whatever happened and whoever those people might be. But going back to your thought that a kid makes up their story, yeah, I mean, I had my story, and based on some of the facts in the information that was given, my story was that, my biological father and his secretary
Had an affair.
something.
That's what
you
you
know
thought.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, were they single? Was one of them married? Were they both married? I don't
Yeah.
know. But there was enough there that left to the imagination that there was a potential office kind of scenario. And that ended up not being the case, but that's another podcast for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's so, even that teeny tiny bit of information helped you as a child see that there was more to the story than just you getting dumped on a corner because you weren't loved.
Yeah.
Like that you even had the wherewithal, at least as you got older, to think like, oh, these other people may have been having some sort of problem.
But
there was
in some
some
ways
situation.
too, because it wasn't, you could tell it wasn't I got dumped off at the front steps of the,
What made you know that?
the nunnery or whatever dropped off. That because they were educated and they were, you know what I'm saying? Like you could tell from the information
Yeah, that's right. It did give
that they
them-
were not destitute. And so that does bring up the question.
Why didn't
for
they
a
keep
kid?
you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why? What was the deal? You know.
Yeah.
So.
What other sort of survival? So I call it a survival strategy, but yours, one of them is definitely like when you would begin to feel any sort of pain or emotion surrounding that loss, you quickly jump to, well, I have so much to be grateful for.
Yeah.
I have so much to be grateful for. I have so much to be grateful, which is such a great quality. I know it absolutely is. But I think in some instances, it can keep you from really experiencing the loss that you had. What
Sure.
are there other? Can you think of some other strategies that you may have turned to in absence of, or not in absence, but in trying to figure out just your place in the world, like you said, when the hamster wheel was spinning.
Yeah, yeah. Music's been a big deal for me, because I think in some ways, like songwriting, and I think about some of the songs that I've written that have to do with the expression of being adopted or just introspective type songs or scenarios, whether they're exactly about me or I've written as if it's a story about somebody else. Songs are a very controlled way for me to connect with my emotions. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're very like there's structure, and the words are what they are. It's almost like coloring in the lines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And you can write them about somebody else.
I can write them about somebody else. So for me, I think one of the things that attracted me to music very early on, first as a consumer of music, was I could relate to things within a lyric and or a melody and a rhythm, and I could, you know what I mean? Like that was a place where it was safe to interact with some level of emotion. I've never been like a just go sit down on the couch and have a good cry. I mean, that just hasn't been.
I've seen you cry very few times.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that probably does go back to what you're talking about. And that is maybe, maybe there's a lot there that just.
Yeah.
And now in life, I've had the opportunity to process the whole situation. I mean, again, we can talk for as long as you want or whatever, as many times as it is appropriate to have a conversation about it. But, now I've connected, right? I'm completely connected now. There's not a part of the story I don't know now.
Right.
And so I think.
Within reason.
Yeah.
You've talked to all the parties that are still alive.
Yes.
But that does not
Yes.
include your birth mother or
Correct.
birth father.
Correct.
I really would like to tell that story, but I want to stay on the music here for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you write songs,
Yep.
and a lot of those songs have been about you processing. I mean, you have a whole album called More Like Me. But what I want to talk about is in writing those songs, More Like Me, even the title, which I think I might have contributed some to the title
yeah.
of that. But in that process, that was kind of a culminating, if you ever culminate processing that you were adopted and you're all these things that we're talking about right now. But those songs were very much, most of them were written during a time where you were processing. You were meeting your siblings,
Yeah.
and you were, processing the whole thing. I mean, it was a
Sure.
huge time in our lives. It was huge
Yeah.
for me, and so let's just talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about how you started that search, because we've been married for a long time, and I remember there was one. And I remember it by houses that we lived in, but when we lived in the Tomball house, there was a time that you wanted to find your birth family. Or no, maybe before that, maybe before the Tomball house. But anyway, and you kind of stalled out.
Yeah.
You're like, I think you may have contacted DePelchin for their post-adoptive services, and then you just kind of let the ball drop. And then a few years later, you pursued it even more.
Yeah.
And you started by contacting DePelchin. So let's talk about that story of how that all went down and what you were feeling and why you were attempting to dig in this at this point.
Again, because my parents always made it accessible to me, I think two things were going on. I think one thing is to go and find out means that you're really admitting and accepting that somebody gave you up. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to hear it, but then you're like, okay, I'm going to go like actually open Pandora's box here. And that's a different level of acknowledgement that this is real and it's about to get more real.
Right.
So I lost my train of thought.
Well, that was the hardest step for you.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So no, I remember now. So the fact that I always had access to it, I think also it made it less taboo.
Okay.
So I didn't feel like I needed to go behind anybody's back to try to figure it out, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so the fact that it was accessible made it less like a rebellion thing. Like, I want to find out who I really am.
We did have computers at this place at this time.
Yeah,
I
we did.
remember.
So,
but we went through DePelchin.
Yeah. So, you know, so again, going back to even like teenager, you know, having conversations with dad, and he's like, yeah, we can go to the attorneys, and, you know, so, and then, I don't know, it was just, I just didn't do it. And then, I think right after we had our first son,
Okay, maybe that's
I think
what it was.
that I remember that being a point where maybe I wanted to find out and just didn't pull the trigger. And then at some point, I actually got the paperwork and started filling it out, and then just dropped, you know, just didn't do it again. So I can't explain all the psychology behind all that.
Okay.
But then after I was in the process of, I was really kind of having just a crisis of existence somewhere around 30-something, 31, 32. You know,
2003.
It was 2003. Okay, so I was working as a partner in a consulting company that was a great company, great people, and felt like we were achieving like everything you're supposed to achieve, you know, get married, make money, live the American dream, make your parents proud, that deal. We were doing all that, right?
We just bought a new house that we had built.
Built new house, and
Yeah.
I was miserable. I was miserable just from a perspective of not feeling like I was engaged in what I was put here to do. That's the best way I can say it. And I'll also say that a lot of what I now understand is trauma, right? That comes from even being removed from your biology as an infant.
Which in your case was the case.
Yeah, and the way that affects, you know, fear responses and flight or fight or flight,
or your mother's,
and all of that.
What was going on in utero?
Yeah.
All of that is right. That's all part of it. Okay.
Definitely. So, so I'm lost again on where I was, but
You were going through a crisis of belief, like knowing who you are. You were miserable.
Right. And so one of the other, absolutely, no doubt, amongst other coping mechanisms, alcohol has always definitely been a way that I could just calm. You know what I mean? Like that helped calm things. And
what you now know is your fight or flight response.
yeah. And one of the things that was showing up for me in the corporate world was, you know, being at these big conventions and, you know, dealing with all the, you know, we worked with everybody from little companies to billion-dollar companies, and feeling like you're right where you're supposed to be as a successful business person, you know, interacting with the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and all that kind of stuff. And like just needing to numb out just to be around it. And
you didn't feel like you were being authentic where you were, or you were doing what you were meant to do.
I think it was.
Was it part of it, the hamster wheel going on in your head?
If it was, I wasn't cognizant that that's what was happening. I just knew there was something more for me. I knew I needed a change. I needed something different.
Okay.
And so all of that is going on. I start working with a life coach that really helped me start to maybe understand. It's funny how somebody on the outside can look at your story and go, well, dude, you need to do this, this, and this. And then you sit with it for a minute and you go, well, yeah, that's exactly what I need to do. And one of the things he said is you need to leave your job. You know what I mean? Like you need to lay that down and get ready for what's coming next. And then another thing is you need to understand where you come from. Mm-hmm. And so like that was the push and encouragement that I needed to do both. And that's a whole nother story about leaving corporate America and jumping out of that boat to jump into something that was more creative and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it was at that same time, amidst all of that life change, at about 32 years old, that I got with DePelchin, filled out the paperwork, and then one day when you were out getting a mani-pedi or whatever, I don't know what you were doing.
That's all I do.
You were somewhere, and I had 2 little boys running around. I don't know if Carter was around yet. I guess he was. But DePelchin calls and says, I have your file. And I remember my heart just about stopped. You know what I mean? Because like all of this time, even since I was a kid, pondering opening this door and taking a look inside, and now the person on the other end of the line is looking at it.
Yeah.
And I just remember that moment. It was like, oh crap. What have I
Pandora's
done?
box.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were
for sure.
scared to see what was inside.
Yeah.
And excited at the same time.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So that's where things were for me.
I know you're critical musician, and you as soon as I brought up More Like Me, but there's a couple of songs on there that I don't know if this is possible. You're the engineer person, but could we somehow put those in a download of those songs in the show notes?
Yeah, or I can re-record a better
No.
version.
We want that.
All right.
We want the real deal.
Yeah.
But there's a song called "The Pearl" in that on that album that is, you rarely, if ever, play in a live show. Will you tell us about that song?
Yeah.
Because I think that song describes exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. I'll try to tell you I'll try to see. I don't think I've ever condensed the story into like 3 minutes.
Okay, you need to condense it into 3 minutes.
I will do it. Okay.
Except for the song. The song's about 3 minutes.
So so DePelchin calls me and starts to tell me the story, and I had my story in my head that I thought, but the story was and is that there was an affair between the CEO of a company and the CFO's wife, and it happened in the Bahamas. And by the way, when the DePelchin lady opened my file, before she told me any of it, she said, "This is the strangest file I've ever seen. Like, this is a crazy story." So, conceived in the Bahamas.
They were living over there.
They were living over there, and one of the families, my birth father and his wife, went on to recover from the affair and do really well. And my birth mother and her husband remained married after the affair. Didn't end well. And the song "The Pearl" is really a synopsis of the story, with the punchline of, well, first off, I never got to meet my birth mother or father. They had both passed away. They were older when I was conceived, and they both had passed away by the time I started searching. And who I did get to meet is I did get to meet siblings on both sides of the equation, one of which lived 3 miles from us in our house, and we shopped at the same grocery store, and it's crazy. There's so many crazy parts to the story. But the most important thing that I want to relay that really is kind of the crux of the emotional moment in the song The Pearl is that my birth father's wife, so one of the two that was cheated on, she was still alive and when I was doing my search. And ultimately, I had the opportunity to meet her, and that whole family on my biological father's side, from the siblings to the cousins to the uncles and aunts to the wife of my birth father, they all loved him so much, and I can only imagine that. I mean, he did such a good job of owning his mistakes that he made that resulted in me, right?
Mm-hmm. So maybe they weren't mistakes.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, right? But the coolest part of the whole story was that his wife, whose name is Joy, and everybody calls her Mama Joy, Mama Joy and their whole family loved my birth father so much that when they found out that there was another piece of him still walking around on this planet, they wanted to be around it. They wanted to be around me.
They embraced you.
Yeah. And so, man, you make up these stories in your head, and this hamster's running on the wheel back there. And most of the stuff, I think, that goes on in a kid's head or in somebody's head that doesn't know their story, they're usually, I mean, maybe some people do. They tell themselves a Cinderella story or something like that. Mine, and I would think that this is true mainly for people, is that there's a level of shame or brokenness, or somebody didn't want me,
or
for
something's
some reason.
wrong with you.
Something's wrong.
Something's wrong with you.
So to get to the truth of the story, and then part of the truth of that story for me being that the blood that runs inside me means so much to some people that there was nothing but acceptance and love and embrace was a big deal. That was a big deal for me, because I think it's one thing to understand your story, and then I think it's another thing to like come to peace with it, and the fact that people who had been affected by it in negative ways had not only come to peace with it, but were like wanted to be a part of it. Like, that's huge. That was a huge deal for me.
And they saw you as a gift.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Which was something important for you to experience.
Yep. Absolutely.
If you can imagine.
Yep.
When your subconscious has been telling you that maybe something's wrong with you or something's not quite right, for someone to say, "Oh, you're my gift."
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. And
yeah,
I
it was
absolutely,
such a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's still a big deal. And it's
Yeah.
such a big deal that we named our daughter, we changed her middle name when we adopted her to Skyla Joy. Not only because she is such a joy, but because she, Mama Joy passed away the year we adopted Skyla. If I remember correctly, it was 2018. And is that right? 2000, I'm pretty sure it was. You're not 100% sure, but I think so. And so we named her after Mama Joy.
Yeah.
And the lyrics to that song are so beautiful to me. You used the analogy of a pearl. And I believe it was, you had heard someone talking about how pearls are formed, like farmed, basically.
Yeah.
And that they clamp the oyster shut so that the sand in the oyster will and I guess in the wild they're so rare because the oyster will spit out
It's
the grain
an
of
irritant,
sand.
so the
It's
sand
an
gets
irritant.
in,
Yeah.
and they don't want it in there, and so they spit it out. So when they're farming pearls, they actually put the sand in there and then wire it
shut.
so that it can't let it out. So,
And so you had heard that story and
Yeah.
you started to think about your situation. You had learned how the story went down and you put it into the most beautiful song ever.
Thanks.
And just talking about, the struggle that you were born. You exist from a struggle.
Yep.
And that you, and I think Mama Joy helped you see this, but that you are a pearl. And the song says, I am a pearl born of a great price.
Yep.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
I hope you will let us put that in the show notes and people can download that.
Yeah. And again, going back to music, it's hard for me, even, in moments like this, talking about it, to just completely rip that back and let it out. But there's been a handful of songs that I've written where it's like tears on the guitar. You know what I mean? Like
Was that one of them?
It's coming out. Yeah, for sure.
I wasn't in the room when you wrote
No,
that song.
I was all by
the tears.
myself
The
on
tears
that one.
probably wouldn't have flowed.
Yeah.
But I really, really think that, and this is going to go to a continued podcast around this topic, but so because I live with you and have for 30 years, or how long we've known each other for 30 years, so 27 years, I have seen firsthand the power of you understanding your story and making sense of your story. And really, I think that's what I wanted to get today from you. And then I want to continue on to this. Maybe I want to continue on. We may close this out here, but let's stay in this conversation for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I want to continue on to how you getting your story and finding peace and realizing that you are a pearl born of a great price, a struggle, right? Which is the truth of anyone who's been fostered or adopted.
Yeah, for sure.
They were born of a great price.
Something
they have lost
happened.
something.
Yeah,
they
something
have
happened.
already experienced
Yeah.
the greatest loss of their life when they come to us, and understanding the value of giving a child their story.
Yeah.
And so what I want to continue, and I know you may have something else to say, and I'm going to let you say it, but what I want to do is to continue next time, and we'll keep talking here today, but I want to continue a future podcast, like next week or whatever, talking about how you understanding your story, and really me understanding my story, has played in the role of helping our girls understand their story and how powerful that is.
Yeah. I mean, I have to imagine, first off, even 15 years ago, 18 years ago, when I started, I'm finally going to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
I remember I bought a couple of books, both of them by Nancy Verrier. One of them called The Primal Wound. Going back to one of the things I'd always told myself is, you could ask me, what is it like being adopted? My answer would be, well, I have great parents. Well, that's not the question I asked. I asked you, what does it feel like to be adopted? And I'd be like, well, I have great parents.
There's that
right?
7 on the
that.
Enneagram showing up again.
That was my answer. What do you want out of me?
Right.
I had great parents. But I remember at that time, again, with all the transition and everything going on in my life, I was more open to exploring something a little bit deeper. And I got that book, The Primal Wound, and this is pre Karen Purvis and, trauma-informed care and all that kind of stuff. And I start reading about the effects of removing a child from their biological environment, regardless of the biological environment. Like, that's not even the conversation that I'm having right now. But removing a child from their DNA has an effect, even as an infant, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember reading was, go out into the wild and take any newborn animal, baby deer, baby rabbit, whatever, remove it from its mother and watch the response. The book said that they're removing infants from their mothers, they often have to sedate the babies because they're crying so hard that they'll hurt themselves. Right? Now, allowing myself to begin to process, like, that had some sort of effect on me, and beginning to understand a little bit more about the brain science 18 years ago, and going, okay, like, this makes sense. Like, yeah, this is why I turn to this when I'm feeling this way, or this is why, and being able to, like, look and go, because that's one thing when you are adopted, whatever environment you're in, you're like, there's not a whole lot of a roadmap there because nobody around you is like you. I think about our girls, right? I mean, we look different. We don't have the same DNA. Our brains are going to work a little bit different. We're going to have different predispositions and that kind of stuff. And then there's the trauma, right?
Right.
So
I'm really glad they have each other.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool that got little half siblings.
Yeah.
And so I don't know where I was going with that, other than
Well, I think
a kid's story, regardless of if they're a foster child that gets removed from a home as a teenager, or they get removed from home as an infant, right?
Yeah.
Like, it still has an effect, irregardless of the circumstances.
Yeah.
It has an effect that's going to play out
Yeah.
consciously and unconsciously in that child's life.
Yeah.
And anything we can do, and I'm living proof of this, and I waited a long time. And I think there's a bigger hand that guides, and so I'm just going to accept that the timing was perfect, and I didn't get to meet my birth mother and father. But that's just how it was supposed to go down. I got what I needed from finding out my story.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like that conversation is extremely important, and I will be glad
You'll
to,
continue
I'll be glad
this
to come back
conversation?
on your show anytime you
Well,
want.
you won't stay right here. Going to keep going. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Kyle, for sharing your story. Please make sure you hit like and subscribe to the podcast. You can download the Pearl, the song that we talked about today, as well as your Wisdom from the Well cards in the show notes below. Thanks again for joining us. I'll see you next week.
Mama's well.
Yes, she